Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a books beside my bed video for you where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading. I'm going to apologise for sounding a little bit rough today. I'm not quite sure what's going on. It could just be early morning stuff, it could be my asthma playing up because yay, springtime. So we're just going to have to run with this. Even I can tell that I sound weird. We have a lot of books to talk about this week, mostly from one particular series, which you will know if you have watched my last vlog, but we are going to jump in really quickly as I talk about some junior fiction books, and then I'm going to dive into the rest of everything that I read this week. Starting off with the Sporty Kids series by Felice and illustrated by Tom Gillett. These are a series of junior fiction novels that have been written for kids that are all about sport. So they feature a series of kids who feature throughout the various books and the sports that they play, and then they have various messages within the actual books. I'll go through them all in a minute, but these are the kind of junior fiction novels that have quite large text, a few chapters, and are very easy and engaging for kids to read. I don't think they have any particular sequence that you're supposed to read them in. I put them in rainbow order because that's just me, and I also have at least one more book that I'm missing from the series that's on order. In basketball, we're following a girl called Jessica, and she has a pair of lucky shoes that get destroyed, and so that absolutely just destroys her confidence in playing basketball moving forward. Then there is Footy, which is about Joe. So this is Australian rules football, for anyone who's interested. Joe is terrible at handballing, which is a key skill within this sport, and so it's him trying to practice and learn to get better at that. Likes to, you know, routinely tell others on her team what she's doing really well and what she's doing really well, and it's about her having to learn how to work as a team player. Tennis is about Stefan and Emma. Stefan likes to play tennis by himself and is constantly hitting a ball against a wall. He imagines who his opponents are until he meets Emma, who is his new next door neighbour, and she joins in with him. Cricket is about Pete, who plays a regular sort of friendly competition with another family, and he's determined to win this year, but things don't go quite according to plan. Handball is about Luca. This one is more about persistence, and it's about a younger student challenging an older student to a competition and the flow-on effects of that. Swimming is Emma's book, and she is learning to dive, and she's not very good at it, but it's a skill that she works at. And netball is about Lizzie, who is netball obsessed and likes to be the coach from the sidelines, even when her teammates would rather prefer that she just tone it down just a little. So it's a really fun series that's got some great messages for kids around playing sport and being team players and engaging within a sporting community of their own. So I had a great time reading these. I picked them up because I really needed some more sports books, particularly chapter books that are simpler for a few of my readers who are working a little bit below reading level but would be engaged in these. So they're fun, and I'm looking forward to reading. I think the one that I've got on order is Little Athletics. So these are very Australian, by the way. Like it's a very Australian kids series, but it's going to be great for some of the kids in my class. Also, I'm going to briefly mention the books that I talked about in my vlog, just because they fell as part of this week, and also because two of the books are part of the same series that I'm going to talk about in a moment. So I read Lights Out by Jodie Beau, Pumpkin by Megan Wade, Midnight Mischief by Lyla Andrews, and A Little Wicked by Morticia Storm Onyx. These are all Halloween or Thanksgiving themed novellas, and in that same video I also read Eagle and Shamrock by Janie, which were books 2 and 3 in the linear tactical series, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. So thinking about other things that I read throughout the week, I finally picked up Beacon by Claire Kent, which is the 8th and final book in the Kindled series. This is a post-apocalyptic series about people who are surviving and living and finding love after the end of the world. This final book follows Mac, who has been a character who has been present through every other book in the series and is a really important character because he's kind of been the father figure, the glue, the person that just brings everyone together. And in a previous book, he kind of just walked away from that and disappeared. And he's also had this on-again, off-again relationship with a woman named Anna, who prior to the end of the world was in a very abusive relationship. And so she's not quite sure that she can do a long-term committed relationship because she just doesn't trust people. But one of the very few people that she does trust is Mac, and eventually she just decides to go after him and try and find him and bring him back to the people who love and miss him, even if she can't offer him what he wants. And honestly, this book is a lot of them in forced proximity, in close quarters, because end of the world, but they also have healing to do of their own and with each other. And then sort of the more conflict part of the book is really the series wrapping up and them going after a group that have been terrorizing sort of local villages and groups and things like that. It was a really nice wrap up to the series. I won't say too much more than that because it's, you know, the 8th book in a series, but it was nice to spend more time with Mac and Anna and get to know them and their backstories and see how it fits into the wider Kindled universe. And of course we get to see all of the other couples and characters that we've met throughout the series, where they are now and how everything is going. So it was just nice to have a conclusion in that way. I'm pretty sure that there is sort of like a spin-off series coming next year, which is really exciting. But in terms of the Kindled universe, this is like, it's complete and it's really, really well done. Then I picked up Cyclone by Janie Crouch. This is the first book in the linear tactical series. I got a copy of this for free at Rare last year. So this was the last book that I had to read from my Rare TBR. I absolutely loved it. It's a romantic suspense and it was just highly enjoyable. As with many of these kind of books, the setup is you have the male protagonists throughout the series are either part of or are connected to Linear Tactical, which is essentially a survival training group. They're all kind of ex-army or ex-special forces or something like that. And they teach civilian classes, so self-defense, survival training, etc. But they also work with law enforcement agencies and they are also involved in some other bits and pieces kind of adjacent to like security company work, but for the most part their work is based within this small town of Oak Creek. This is the story of Annie and Zach. Zach is one of the founders of Linear Tactical, and Annie is a doctor who has returned to Oak Creek and is trying to keep a low profile. She and Zach actually knew each other previously. She was his wife's best friend, and Zach's wife and child were killed in a car crash. I can't remember how much earlier before this book, but years earlier, by a teenager who fell asleep at the wheel. And that's important because Jordan is a character who comes up later in the book. And what we find out is that after his wife's death, Zach and Annie slept with one another, and Zach was very drunk and reacted in a particular way, and Annie left town and never spoke to him again. But now she's back and she finds herself coming face to face with him, and they have to work it out, and Zach doesn't remember that night at all. Being a romantic suspense, a lot of things happen. Annie gets into trouble quite a bit, but not because she's actively walking into trouble, just because someone's targeting her. And I deeply appreciate that about this series, as I'll say it now because it's a feature in all of the books. None of the female protagonists are helpless, and none of them are deliberately trying to put themselves in harm's way. They're not making stupid decisions. They are caught up in situations that are beyond their control, and they often try to find ways to figure it out themselves even if they can't, or they figure out a way to try and survive under extreme circumstances. So I appreciate that, because I think the only way romantic suspense works is if the characters are on even footing. And so then I just decided to keep reading the Linear Tactical series. So the vlog happened after I read Cyclone, and then I read Angel, which is book 4, and this one is Gabe and Jordan's story. So Jordan was the teenager who was responsible for Zach's wife and toddler's death. She was put into prison, and we find out that her family has a history within the town. Her dad is basically a con artist, and he scammed a lot of money off of the townspeople. So when Jordan was involved in this accident, basically her sentencing was harsher than it probably should have been for someone who, actually she wasn't even 18, she hadn't turned 18 yet. And so she's been in prison for I think 6 years, and she's gotten out of prison. Zach was a character witness for her, but the whole town basically treats her as a pariah, and they actively bully her. She doesn't want to leave, she can't leave. She's still on parole, so she has to stay within a certain vicinity, and all she wants to do is work. And so she's found work with one of the female protagonists from a previous book who's come to town, and the male protagonist of the series is Gabe, who is the brother of the woman who's hired her. In the previous book, we kind of get a very strong sense that Gabe doesn't like her, but in this book what we find out, because the stories kind of run parallel, is that he is attracted to her, she's attracted to him, and they've had these on and off moments. It's not the healthiest of relationships initially, until Gabe realizes exactly how much pressure the town is putting on Jordan, who's only in her early 20s. It culminates in a scene which is, I think I talked about it in the vlog, which is absolutely heartbreaking, because she's injured. She's been taken to hospital, and none of the hospital staff will treat her. Basically everyone from the Linear Tactical team loses it over this, including Annie, who was from the first book, and she is in charge. She's the head doctor for the ER. When she finds out, she's absolutely livid. Mostly it's Jordan and Gabe building up trust with one another. There's also another thread line and a plot line that's linked to Linear Tactical and sort of that romantic suspense plot line. But for the most part, it's this dynamic between these two that shouldn't work, but does. And, you know, Gabe has to apologize quite a bit through this book because he does some really stupid things. Book 5 is Ghost. This is Dorian and Grace's story. And this one is about a subgroup of the Linear Tactical group, Dorian, Grace, and also Heath, and Heath's book is the next one, who were recruited for a secret special operations group where they were basically trained as spies, and unbeknownst to them initially, they were brainwashed. And many of them were given sort of sleeper missions that they didn't know about. They thought they were working for the US government, turns out they weren't. And so they've been trying to figure out what's going on. Both Dorian and Grace were part of this program, and this book is them trying to track down the remainder of the organization and trying to figure out who is killing off everyone within this organization. And this one was a lot darker than previous books. Even though there's a lot of heavy content in previous books, this one, there's quite a lot mentioned, and this one is probably the goriest of the books that I've read so far in the series. There's also a second chance romance between the two of them. They've had a relationship in the past, but they were separated when Dorian was kidnapped and tortured for a significant period of time, and Grace believed herself responsible for that, and Grace is still trying to protect him, even though there are a lot of external forces working against her. So that one was a really interesting one. And then Shadow is book 6, and this is Heath's story, and Heath is another member of that group. And he was never actually a soldier. He was a linguist, and he is very, very good at languages. And so he was recruited because he's charming, he can speak multiple languages, and he picks up bits and pieces of other languages really easily. He is apparently the key to all of the research that went into training and brainwashing the members of this spy group. When sort of his last lead goes dead, he's asked by the FBI to help investigate something else that's going on. And so he goes undercover at a local university where he meets Lynn, who is a linguist who is completing her doctoral studies. He doesn't realize at the time that Lynn is actually his best friend's little sister, mostly because his best friend doesn't call her Lynn, and she has a different last name, and her brother doesn't realize that she's studying linguistics, and so the two fall for one another. So it makes for a really fun twist on the best friend's sibling romance, because he legitimately had absolutely no idea going into it at all. The other thing I appreciated about this book is that Lynn actually has a heart condition, and so that is a factor in the story, and something that she's constantly managing and is mentioned because she is under high stress situations. It affects her physically as well as emotionally. And it was kind of fun because this book really brought to a close sort of that story arc with that secret group, and Heath finally gets some answers as to why he's constantly hearing gibberish in his head. And then the last book that I read in Linear Tactical this week was book 7, and that was Echo, and this is Peyton and Cade's story. And Cade is also not a soldier. He is the silent investor in Linear Tactical, and he is a country music superstar from the small town. So he's friends with all of the guys, and he invested his money into their business. This is also a second chance romance with a secret baby trope, but this one didn't annoy me so much. We get the setup for their relationship, which was 5 years earlier. Peyton and Cade are unlikely friends, and she's about to go off to study filmmaking in Europe, and he has just started to make a name for himself in country music, and so they're going in separate directions, but they have this moment where they're both vulnerable and they sleep together. We find out that she finds out that she's pregnant, and she tries to tell Cade that, but she gets back a packet of legal documents basically saying, terminate the pregnancy, here's $10,000, don't ever speak to Cade ever again. And she thinks it's from him because it's all been signed by him. Meanwhile, he's just lost his father, so he's grieving. Then we jump forward, and throughout the series we've known Peyton. Peyton is one of the side characters in the series. Her daughter Jess is a very precocious, very intelligent young character. I will say, even for a very intelligent young child at 4 or 5 years old, she does read older. I wish she'd kind of been aged up a year or two, but whatever. It's not completely out of the realm of possibility, but it maybe a little bit. Cade comes back to town. He sees Peyton. She is very cold towards him because she hasn't spoken to him for years, and she thinks basically he wanted nothing to do with her and Jess. And turns out he has no idea that she even has a kid, and that's because all of the correspondence went through his aunt, who was his manager at the time, and she never told him because she didn't want his career to derail. The book is them rebuilding a relationship, building enough trust for Peyton to trust him around Jess. He makes it really clear that he doesn't want to take Jess from her. He just wants to get to know her and then let Peyton decide sort of where the boundaries are from there. And alongside all of this, there is a stalker plot line that Cade has that Peyton and Jess find themselves embroiled in. Plus, you also have Peyton's family history, and she experienced some pretty severe domestic violence from her stepfather before she had Jess. And so that is also a factor within the book. So like that, I said, heavy topics, but really fast-paced plotline, great writing style. The one thing that gets me in romantic suspense, and I said this earlier, is that I do not like passive, silly, stupid female protagonists who get themselves into situations even when they've been told not to, all of the female characters take it seriously when their partners say, no, hang on, you've got to be aware of this, you've got to notice things, etc. And they do that. They don't blindly walk into a situation. And if they notice something, they say something. Because like even in this book, Peyton's alone setting up a filming location and she hears something and she immediately calls someone and says, hey, this doesn't feel right. She doesn't just go off and investigate it because she's not silly. I appreciate that. All right, and then I read Fans Only by Be Love. This was the Buzzwordathon book pick for the month of November. Well, for me anyway, because it has the word only in the title. It's a black love novella that all of my friends have recommended before, between Aries and Merrick. Fans Only is an online streaming service where people can subscribe to and pay money for people's content. And Aries and Merrick, who are friends, decide that they're going to, for 6 months, make sexual content on the app, raising money for their future careers. And they're going to do it, and no feelings are going to get hurt, no one's going to get attached. Yeah, right. And so they do it. And of course, they fall for one another. So it's a friends to lovers kind of story. And it was fun. It was a really enjoyable read. It was well written and a good example, I think, of using this setup in a romance story. And then the last book that I have to talk about is The Firelight Apprentice by Bree Paulsen, which is their new graphic novel. So they wrote Garlic and the Vampire and Garlic and the Witch. This is the story of Ada and Safi, who are sisters, and they live with their father in a small town. This is a world of magic. And their mother was a magician for the king who was killed in a war. Safi has displayed a bit of magical talent and Ada is concerned about her development. And the only way for Safi to be trained is to be taken as an apprentice by a magician. But that can be challenging because if Safi does become a magician, then she also owes years to the king in service. And also in this world, there are liches who are stealing magic. Eventually it gets to a point where they have to find a magician to apprentice Safi to, and it just so happens that there is a traveling group of magicians who come through town who have links to their mother. So Safi is taken on as an apprentice and she's learning alongside the 3 magicians, and Ada is constantly writing to her, but it seems like Safi is never getting the messages, and that is clearly evident when Safi returns to town with the magicians and Ada has to tell her that her father has died and that this happened, and she tried to tell Safi, but Safi didn't know. There's also a 4th magician who they've met throughout the book, throughout the graphic novel, who has only minimal power, and he's accused of being a lich but is proven not to be, and it turns out that he actually knows one of the magicians in Safi's group and that maybe they are not quite who they seem. It was really fun and enjoyable, and it has Bree Paulsen's distinctive illustrative style. I really enjoyed it. This one I probably won't take into the classroom. My class love Garlic and the Witch and Garlic and the Vampire. I feel like this one is probably just a little bit old for the age group that I teach, but I thoroughly enjoyed this and I'll continue to pick up Bree Paulsen's stories because it was just really interesting and fun. And that is everything that I've read in the last week. It's been a lot. So thank you very much for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you've read any of these books or you're planning on picking any of them up, feel free to let me know down below. Otherwise, feel free to share something that you have read and loved this week. If you want to let me know that you're here but you don't leave a comment, feel free to leave a book stack emoji down below. Otherwise, I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, everyone.